One evening in January 2015, I was having a long conversation with a friend of mine who we'll call Chris because that was and is his name. Chris and I were talking about the concept of malls, and I was talking specifically about my discouragement in my field and how people were treating the internet as though it were an emergent marketplace and not one that has been a really solid contender for at least 15 years. We continued talking about the changing tide of commerce, and it brought us around to one of our favorite topics, that being the dead mall. The concept of a dead mall was one that Chris introduced me to around 98, 99, 2000, where, again, the internet was just really coming into its own then, but really, dead malls and the decline of mall culture was really on the wane by the mid-1990s, and before everybody had the internet in their home and before concepts like Cyber Monday had been developed. So what I wanted to do this evening is to shine a light on a couple of these places, talk about my visits there, and in a way document what is every day becoming more and more of an antiquated concept, that of a mall. About a year ago, I had to do a public event at a mall in Clarion County, and one of the things that really surprised me was that I was there on a weekday evening in a relatively small town, maybe not so small by Western Pennsylvania standards, but certainly not big even by the standards of Western and Central Pennsylvania. What surprised me was how many people were there and how few closed storefronts there were. Over the recent years, I've become conditioned to assume that any mall is going to have about as many closed fronts as they have open and active storefronts. So this was a surprise to me, especially considering how small the area was, the population of the town was. And it made me consider at that time the changing state of malls and where they used to have to really be focused on big population centers. Such is the case of the Eastland Mall. Construction on the Eastland Mall began in 1961. It was being developed by the Gimbels Department Store Corporation, which at that time, Gimbels was the largest chain of department stores in America, along the lines of Sears, Roebuck, and Woolworths, which is another one of those large department stores that's no longer around. The Eastland Mall officially opened up on August of 1963, and if you're wondering where the mall was located, as it has since been torn down, it was a short distance from Route 30, the Lincoln Highway, south of the city of Pittsburgh, in the areas of Braddock, Turtle Creek, North Versailles, and East McKeesport. It shouldn't be a surprise to anybody that the Gimbels store was the main anchor in the mall, which was 2 stories, kind of, when it opened. Had a Gimbels that was essentially, that had a partial 3rd floor. Originally, the upper level, that, as I said, was kind of a 2-story. The upper level of the Eastland Mall was an outdoor area. There were storefronts on the sides, but the hallway that you were walking through was an open-air hallway. Now, in the early 1970s, there was a fire that damaged a significant portion of the mall, and afterwards, during the reconstruction of the mall, they closed in that 2nd level and made it a fully enclosed mall. And there's a couple reasons the enclosed mall was a favorable design, not only because in Pittsburgh we have the tendency to have some pretty harsh winters, but also Western Pennsylvania, and particularly southwestern Pennsylvania, gets a lot of rain. In fact, I've heard, but I've not really confirmed, I'll have to verify this at some point. I've heard that the Pittsburgh area gets more rainy days than anywhere else in the continental United States. More rainy days than Seattle. However, we don't get as many inches of rainfall as Seattle does annually. Regardless of weather, the other problem was the fact that just a few years earlier, the Monroeville Mall, which is only about 10-15 minutes away from where the Eastland Mall sat, had opened up, and it was a enclosed mall, fully indoors, and at that time it was being touted as the largest mall in the United States. And being so close to the Eastland Mall, this hurt business. In fact, it took a couple of the anchor stores, a couple of those anchors, I believe J.C. Penney's was one, moved away from the Eastland Mall to the Monroeville Mall, where not only there was a better way of getting in and out, but also it being fully indoors. And so the Eastland Mall really starts falling within the first 10 years of its being there. And things would only get worse as several other malls opened up in the area in the 70s, including the Century 3 Mall, which is well known and a jingle around the Pittsburgh area for those you listen to, like KDKA. The Century 3 Mall was another one of these gigantic malls, and I think at the time of its opening, it was the third largest mall in the United States. Why Pittsburgh attracts so many of these, I'm not quite sure, even in the 70s. So you have quite a few malls, some very significant ones, opening up all within a 20-minute drive. Not only is the mall declining, but so too are the populations of the communities that surround the Eastland Mall. The Monroeville Mall is in a more affluent suburb, as is the closely located Century 3 Mall. For those of you not familiar with the story, the history of it, by the late 1970s, Pittsburgh and the Pittsburgh metropolitan region are in dire straits. The steel industry, which was the foundation of blue-collar jobs in the area, was really waning. It was in free fall, more or less, and this hurt the community surrounding the Eastland Mall particularly hard. Braddock, for example, actually had the world's largest blast furnace, known as the Dorothy 6. In fact, that site, if I'm not mistaken, is now another shopping center. By 1987, Gimbels no longer exist. They've liquefied. They've vanished from the world, much as Woolworths would do some years later. The Eastland Mall is then picked up by another company in 1988, the Benderson Development Company, and they're going to renovate the mall in 1988, and they're going to keep it until they finally close the whole operation in 2007 or thereabouts. During this time, not only do the populations of the surrounding communities continue to decline, the mall continues to lose anchors, and in fact, by the early 1990s, the most significant thing that the mall attracts is a weekend flea market that occurs and is really what keeps the place going for the next 15 or so years. When I visited the Eastland Mall, I did so in 2005, shortly before the mall officially closed. I was there with my friend Chris, who I had spoke about earlier this evening, who he and I had that conversation back in January of 2015. When we were there were only a handful of stores operating. There was a discount beer distributor, which was located in one of the large anchor buildings. There was also an urban clothing company, which featured a lot of airbrushed t-shirts. And then lastly, there were two really significant ones to mention because they were there when the mall opened in 1963. There was a shoe repair place and a hair salon that, they're there for the better part of 40 years. When we were there, we were unable to get inside, but we could see the uneven walkway. There was a lot of broken up tiles from where the building had shifted over the years and hadn't been repaired. One of the more interesting things I noted were that there were flags of countries representing some of the traditional ethnic groups of the Pittsburgh region, and a clear appeal to the people who were living in the area at the time that the mall had opened. The whole thing was pretty sketchy though, and the neighborhood of Braddock and North Versailles are not very well regarded in the region. Braddock apparently is making a comeback. About 8 or 9 years ago, the mayor of Braddock was featured in a Rolling Stone article titled "The Mayor of Hell" or something like that, which kind of gives you an idea of what the place is like. When we were in the parking lot driving around, we saw somebody walking his dog, and we saw about the most tactless drug deal ever go down. But that was the Eastland Mall, and one of the early malls in America, really. And it's really kind of interesting, the significant malls and development of malls that take place in Pittsburgh. But the Eastland Mall was killed in large part due to where it was located, not because these were bad areas in the 60s, because they just didn't get the traffic that the area of Monroeville did. And then, of course, when the Monroeville Mall is built, just a few years after the completion and opening of the Eastland Mall, it really kind of puts a nail in the coffin from the get-go. The second place I want to talk about is the Warren Mall. Some people might have an issue with me putting the Warren Mall in a category of a dead mall, but the fact of the matter is just about every storefront in there is closed, and when you have a hand-painted stop sign in your parking lot, things probably aren't doing so well. Now, I know a lot of people that grew up in the area, and they tell me that really up until the late 1990s, the Warren Mall was a big attraction in the area. I've been there on numerous occasions. I've eaten there, and I have a lot of friends that, and even some family members really, who grew up in the area and have a lot of fond memories of the place, and tell me that really it was a vibrant mall up until really the late 1990s, and everybody has their opinion as to why it's fallen, and it's fallen in a very dramatic way and in a very short time. Some people claim that the current owners are responsible for the downfall. Some people say that it was the improvements and developments of malls in nearby Jamestown, New York, just a short drive north of where the Warren Mall is located, and others say that there's some tax incentives to going to New York, or it was just the increased development of some strip malls that are just north of the city of Warren itself. Regardless, the Warren Mall sits between the town of Russell and the city of Warren off Route 62 in that northern tier of Pennsylvania in Warren County. Some people might take exception to me placing the Warren Mall as a dead mall, but every time I go there, there is another place, another storefront closed up. And the first time I was there weren't very many storefronts open to begin with. I'll talk about that in a second, but when I first went to the Warren Mall, this would have been in summer of 2012, there was a Big Lots and a Kmart. There was a Label Shopper and there was a Goodwill. These were the big anchor stores. There was also an antiques auction place, a hair place, a nail place, and Napoli's Pizza, which is very fondly thought of by most everybody from Warren that I've spoken to. So there you have 8 shops, and there was a senior bocce league that would meet in what was the arcade, Aladdin's Arcade, which was very popular according to a couple of my friends. The next time I go to the Warren Mall, which isn't very long after, the Goodwill is gone. And frankly, if you've got a Goodwill as one of your anchors, again, it's another one of those signs indicating that there's some shaky ground as a foundation. I haven't been back to the Warren Mall since winter of 2014, but in the time since, I've heard that Napoli's Pizza has gone off, and the family that runs the place, they've moved out of the mall and they're doing something else with another pizza place that the family runs, and that Kmart is no longer there. When Kmart and Napoli's really what were drawing most people, and I always kind of thought it was weird that Napoli's, a pizza place located in a shopping mall, delivered. I don't know of any other, at least in my life, I've never come across another mall pizza place that had delivery. So to my understanding, and another one of these may have closed by this point, there is an antiques auction place, there is a nail and a hair place, there is a label shopper, and there is Big Lots. And those are the only 5 things that may be open at the Warren Mall at this time. I haven't gotten any other reports of other places closing. The first time I was there, I walked around and took a bunch of pictures. It was very eerie, and the colors of the tiles, the glossy yellow tiles of the fountains, very dated, and it brought me back and made me feel pointlessly nostalgic for the colors and the feel of my youth. And in my youth, my memories of being very young are all those terrible colors, and they're all dimly lit, and so the Warren Mall was really like walking into a door to yesterday. After I shared my experience at the mall with some of my friends who had grown up in the area, they scolded me for not going to Napoli. So the second time I'm at the Warren Mall, I was upset to see that Goodwill was closed because I'm a thrift store junkie. But I did go to Napoli's, and it was delicious. It was served on these battered metal plates, and I was told that the pizza tasted better off this. So even though I bought a whole pizza, I ate a good bit of it there just so I could have it on the battered metal plate. And really, any subsequent visit I made to the Warren Mall was just to go to Napoli's. I'm not even a big pizza guy, but it was pretty good, and there was something about the experience of being there and carrying your pizza box to an empty, poorly lit mall at 8 in the evening, and at that point it was the only store open at that end of the mall, because Napoli's sat across from the Kmart, and that was one end of the mall, and the only other stores that were open were at the far end. The Warren Mall was opened in 1979, and really beyond that, I don't know much of the history of it. I've got to be out in Warren County again sometime before winter rolls around, so maybe I'll update this at some point, but I really wanted to talk about it because it is still open, and it's not going to be for very long. It was purchased by new owners in 2011, and they had plans for revitalizing it. I haven't seen any signs of that revitalization, but at the same time I had not been there prior to 2011, so what do I know? Anyhow, if you find yourself in Warren, maybe you're driving on Route 6, maybe you're coming up or coming down by way of Route 62, make sure you stop at the Warren Mall, because it is, as I said before, malls in general are a dying thing. Every year they're becoming increasingly antiquated as a concept, and there is going to be a time, most likely a time within our lives, where a mall is just a foreign concept and regarded the same way that a disc player, like a cylinder disc player, or a 78 are thought of as a product of a bygone time when there's no longer a need for it. It's been supplanted by 45s, by tapes, by CDs. The mall has been supplanted by online shopping, because the convenience of the mall was that you had all these stores in one place and you didn't have to drive all over town. And the internet has obviously taken out the need to drive anywhere, and you can wait. Just to come around full circle, in the beginning I talked about the public event I had attended at the mall in Clarion, which still remains vibrant, a small mall in a small place, and where in the past the power of the mall was the power of population and it being an attraction, and you put it in a large city, a large community, and then you benefit from the people around. But part of me thinks that the reason why the Clarion Mall is as vibrant and well attended as it is, at least me speaking anecdotally in my experience there, is the fact that unlike Braddock in North for Sale, where the Eastland Mall was located, and unlike Warren even, there's not a lot of places around Clarion. You have to get on Route 80 and you have to drive a good ways before you get to, say, Du Bois or Grove City, where other such places are, or even down to Indiana, PA. Now the mall has kind of become where the places where a mall can thrive are these small isolated communities, and maybe the mall in these settings will continue to linger on because it gives people in these towns a destination.